Hi everyone and welcome back to my kitchen. The next page in our taco manual actually takes us to one of the accompaniments that you would serve with tacos, and it is probably the most common thing that people would think about. It's called frijoles de la olla, or slow-simmered beans. And I'm going to go through the basics of how you do that classic pot of beans, but we have to first talk about four things. First one is variety of beans. Now in Mexico, sort of Mexico City and south, everybody cooks black beans, and all the way out into the Yucatan. The northern part of Mexico, that means sort of that line from Mexico, just a little north of Mexico City and up, they'll all cook a lot of different color beans, but mostly a light brown bean that they call bayo or frijol de mayo is very common, but there's a lot of different variety in those kinds. You can choose anything that you like or that you have access to. Today, I'm going to be doing black beans because that's my favorite. Second thing that we have to talk about is freshness. And freshness in beans, there's no way you can tell it by just looking at the package. So if you have very fresh beans, meaning you bought them at a farmer's market and you know that they were this year's harvest, they will cook a lot faster than the standard ones you find in most grocery stores that usually are 3 to 4 years old. Okay, next thing that we need to talk about is the slow cooking. The beans always want to be cooked very slowly because they rehydrate through that little eye on the side. If you try to boil them fast, they will just simply break up because there is an inconsistent pressure in the bean. It's trying to rehydrate faster than it can, and so it'll just burst apart. So super slow cooking. And then the last thing, it has to do with soaking beans. Now, I know most of you think you absolutely have to start the beans the night before by soaking them and then drain them, throw away that soaking liquid and cook them. In Mexico, nobody does that. It's just a process of putting everything into a pan and simmering slowly. Now, let's talk about the ingredients that go in classic frijoles de la olla. Of course, have the beans here. I have an onion that is sort of roughly chopped. It's going to cook for a long time, so it'll break up. We have some garlic cloves that are just simply cut in half. If you have it, I always recommend putting in epazote, especially if you are cooking black beans, very common traditional flavor from the southern part of Mexico. The next thing is some kind of pork fat. So this is fresh rendered pork lard, really beautiful stuff. You could also use bacon drippings if you have that. But if you're not a pork person, then I suggest that you use some flavorful oil. Even olive oil will work. And then a little optional thing if you want to do it, and that would be some arbol chiles here to make it a little bit spicy. Not super common in Mexico, but I really like the way that it goes. Now, I've already put the water. I'm going to show you 3 different ways of cooking the beans. I'm going to cook them in the pressure cooker, the electric pressure cooker. I'm going to do some on the stove top, and I'm going to do some in the oven. Oven gives you very even all around cooking and usually goes a little bit faster. The stovetop is what most of us think as the way to cook beans, but you have to kind of watch it because the liquid can evaporate and drop down and the beans could then burn on the bottom. So you have to be around when you're cooking them, although you could use a slow cooker, and then that's sort of a little bit more like the oven approach to it. And then the pressure cooker, which cooks very, very evenly and fast. Okay, so I have now measured the water into everything already since I've got all these pots going on here. It's a slightly bit different quantity of the water depending on how you're cooking it. We have 2 quarts of water for a pound of beans in the pressure cooker. Same thing for the oven, but 2.5 quarts of water for the stovetop because there's a lot more evaporation. Okay, so I'm going to just put all of this stuff into the pots now. Okay, turning high fires here. I'm going to bring both of these to a full boil. This one, of course, will go into the oven, but this one will just braise on the stove top, but at a lower temperature. Now, let's talk about cleaning beans. We work with local beans from a farmer around here that grows the most beautiful black beans I've ever worked with in my life. And they come in super, super clean. But if you're buying your beans at a farmer's market, say, or even sometimes bulk beans, you might want to just put them out onto a rimmed baking sheet and pick through them to make sure that there's no bits of debris or little stones in there that you certainly don't want to have in the beans once they've been cooking, okay? So once these come to the boil, I'm going to partially cover this one that's going to stay on the stove top. Partially covering is really important. If you put the lid on firmly, it will create some pressure which will push the beans down, and they'll have a tendency to stick on the bottom. So the top will just go askew like that, what we call partially covered. We're going to fully cover the ones that are going to go into the oven, and we've set the oven at 275 degrees, and we're just going to let them cook with the top on because they've got radiant heat all the way around. And of course, the pressure cooker here, I'm going to put this on here, and then I'm going to turn it on high, and we're going to just let it go for 1 hour and then let the pressure naturally dissipate. And the ones in the pressure cooker, I've let this the pressure release naturally. Pull the top of it off here. Oh. I'm a bean fanatic. I really love the smell of especially cooking black beans like this, but look how beautiful all that is. A nice kind of creamy broth, but I will say that if you want it to be creamier and thicker, then you might want to take a cup or so of the beans out, no matter how you've cooked them, and blend it smooth in the blender and then scrape it back in, and it will naturally thicken that broth. Okay, we've got a lot of beans here, but I will say they smell absolutely delicious, but they're not seasoned yet. So I'm going to just give it a little taste to start with. Yeah. And beans need a good amount of salt. Now remember, I am using Diamond Crystal here, which has double the volume of table salt. So I'm thinking that we're going to start with the equivalent of about 2 teaspoons of table salt, which would be about a tablespoon and a half here. And let's give this a stir to dissolve the salt into it and taste it again and see where we are. We got that. I'm working against the epazote that's in the pot here. That's perfect. That's the right amount of salt for this. And now they're really ready to serve as an accompaniment to go with a taco feast or something like that. Beautiful. Frijoles de la olla, a little bit spicy from the chile de arbol that we put in there. Nice and rich from the onion and garlic. And I will say that for me, I could make my whole meal just on these beautifully cooked beans.